Hi everyone, this is Gwen from My Spiritual Butterfly. I hope you're good. For those of you that don't know me, I am the founder of My Spiritual Butterfly. I'm also a Reiki Master Teacher, and I am a transformational life coach as well. Tonight, I'm due to be joined by Jae Gibbs. Jae is the founder of the Light Tree. She's also an embodiment practitioner, which means she really creates some beautiful experiences for women, particularly, which involves things like yin yoga, ashtanga yoga, sound healing as well. And that's all sort of beautifully wrapped up with African spirituality and Celtic earth practices. So I'm really excited to have her join me tonight. She is having a couple of technical hitches, so I'm hoping she gets that sorted. And then when she appears, I'm just going to bring her onto the screen, so she will be here. If not, I will carry on the conversation. So, but yeah, so thank you so much for joining me. Basically, with what we wanted to do tonight was talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability has kind of been reframed quite a bit in the well-being space, particularly the healing space as well. So I really wanted to talk about that and how we can embrace vulnerability a little bit more in order to progress our healing, improve our relationships, love relationships, friendships as well, and our businesses too. So, you know, a lot of the things I've seen around vulnerability don't actually tell us the steps to take and how to do that, how far to go. So it is important to kind of reframe that. And give you what we want to do tonight is give you some real life examples in those areas I've just mentioned, so that you know how to actually approach vulnerability yourself and you can start practicing it. Jae has come back in, so I'm going to bring Jae on. Hi Jae, can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear.
Great, fabulous, fabulous. Just in time, it's good. I've just introduced you as an embodiment practitioner and all the elements that make that up. So hi, welcome. I guess doing these things live, we can't always account for that. But yeah, I'm glad you're able to join me. So I've told everybody that we're going to be talking about vulnerability, that it's been reframed already in the well-being space, the healing space in particular. And what we're trying to do tonight is give people a deeper idea of that and what that looks like, as well as some examples from our own experiences concerning areas like, you know, romantic relationships, friendships, and business work. So people know how they can actually be vulnerable, I guess, in a safe way. But yes, Jae, so you're all settled in. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome, welcome.
Yeah, apologies for the disruption.
That's fine. That's the technology. You can't really predict it, can you? Sometimes, having worked in tech for 20 years, I know that full well. So Jae, I wonder if, do you want to maybe start the conversation a little bit, maybe looking at the reframe, kind of how we interpreted vulnerability to how we're looking at it now, maybe. If you wanted to start that conversation.
Yeah. Oh, interesting, because with my curious hat on, I thought, okay, so vulnerability, what's the definition of it? And I interestingly have never looked up the definition before. So that was the first thing I kind of realized. Oh, I've always kind of had my own idea of what it was, what it wasn't, and how it felt, I think, more than like a definition. And so when I looked up the definition earlier with my curious hat on, it was quite intense, actually. It was the description was I'll say some things, and it really conflicts, actually. I want to say with what I found on in Oxford Dictionary, Google, really conflicts with how I personally feel about it. But there was so it was like talking about risk and danger and being open but not being open in the way that I think about it, being open to attack. Yeah, unfortified. There's like lots of words here that kind of lead to something around weakness. And I think that is kind of common association with vulnerability. And so it started to unravel. I thought, okay, so maybe this is where it's coming from. There's like an understanding of vulnerability as something as negative and not positive. And I personally, are we going into like my own perspective? Shall we go there, or should we keep it general?
Yeah, we could. I mean, maybe we. You're welcome to go into your own perspective. That's absolutely fine. I think that's useful.
So where I'm at with vulnerability now, I will say maybe 10, 15 years ago is not the same place. Vulnerability did not feel safe for me. I couldn't frame vulnerability and safety together in the same place. And that was because my experiences, and we talked a little about this when we discussed, you know, this having this topic, was it was, you know, some experiences when I was very young, where I didn't have necessarily the choice to decide when I was vulnerable, when I wasn't. And I don't think that's unique to me. I think that's an experience of childhood that we have. But around 10 to 15 years ago, that started to change for me because I felt like it was getting in the way. I felt like I wasn't being able to connect with people, or there was something, I couldn't have defined it like that then. Let me just step back. There was something missing. There was something missing, and there was a barrier between me and other people, I would say, in relationships in general. And an unwillingness to be perceived as being able to take advantage of, I would say, or maybe what I would have associated with being in a vulnerable state at that point. And I will say what started to change for me was the need to be authentic. Because what the fear of vulnerability was doing was causing me to show up in ways that I thought I should be showing up. And that was really draining. That was really exhausting. This kind of protective armor around me. And so through my healing journey, through my practice, that protective armor started to get a bit ruffled, got a bit shaken up. And so what I found actually, as I started to peel away some of that, I could start to be who I started to think less about how I should be in it with others, with myself, and I started to discover or uncover more about who I was, who I am, in a more authentic, I feel, way. So this idea of being vulnerable and feeling unsafe was holding me back. And I would say a big point, and this is where I'll probably pause after this, but a big moment in that was stepping into a women's circle. I'd never been in, like, even just speaking about it, I can feel something rising up in me, because it was a space like I'd never been in before. I was invited to be myself, like really just be whatever I wanted to be in that space. If I felt tired, I could lie down. If my head felt heavy and I wanted to rest it, I could rest it. And I wasn't having to conform to some idea of what I think I should be doing. And I was welcomed with all of that. And there was really such a freedom that allowed me to be vulnerable. I would say that's because it felt safe. That's because it felt like a place where I wouldn't be judged. Someone wouldn't try and fix me or make me good, or all of these things. Like, I was just free to be me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's very similar to my story. That's interesting. It was interesting though that it was as if you were seeking that permission, whereas what we come to understand now with vulnerability is that we can give that permission to ourselves. So rather than, it's beautiful to introduce it that way, and usually that's the first time we discover it, where we realize, okay, it's actually okay for me to be me in this space, feel what I want to feel, say what I want to say, share, do what I want with my body. But then it's like, well, okay, do I actually need permission to do that? I need to give permission to myself. But yeah, I love that, Jae. Your story is very similar to mine. So a similar type thing. You know, some of my subscribers might know I'm from a corporate background initially, like 20 years in IT and all of that. And then when I started on my sort of healing journey in earnest, I would say, sort of even when I started learning about Reiki and things like that. And I was going to, this is 2015 now, and I was going to all these wonderful kind of workshops and learning these different healing modalities. And what I noticed is, I'm a little bit introverted, I would say, a little bit, well, not, but a little bit. That when I was in say a circle, like you were saying, and it came to the point of sharing maybe about our experience of something we've just done, or the end of the workshop to share, I found that while they were going around to everybody, I was busy kind of preparing what I was going to say. Do you know what I mean? Rather than letting it come from the heart, I was like preparing what I was going to say. And then when it came to me, it sounded so superficial, get my teeth in. It didn't sound as though it was coming from the heart, basically. And I just noticed that was a bit of a pattern in me. And I also coupled that with an understanding. I guess it comes to you, these things sort of come to you at the right time. But I realized that a lot of my friendships I had at that time were friendships from childhood. And I'd formed friendships and acquaintances, but no deep friendships since my school days. And I realized that was kind of why I wasn't really letting people in, similar to what you were saying. I was always kind of like the agony aunt. People would come to me with their problems and their issues, and I'd be the fixer. Therefore, one, I didn't feel I could be vulnerable. I felt like I was letting them down if I was weak or I had problems. So that was one problem. But in this space, I realized that if I just took a breath and trusted what was going to come from me from the heart, it just made more of a difference just in that space of sharing. And when they always get you to do couple work, partner with somebody else and you do some work. And so that's when I just took a bit of a leap to say, do you know what, I'm going to share a little bit more about myself and me and what I do. I'm not going to be the person in this group that has all the answers. I'm also going to be able to empathize with the other person, whereas normally I would be the person, they would say what they've got to say, and I would then, as I said, try to fix them. So I moved out of that role in that kind of space, and the magic just happened. I realized I was able to form closer bonds with people. And some of those bonds, they are like my really, really good friends. I would call them my soul sisters now. But that only happened because I just realized I was sharing in this superficial way. I wasn't really going deep. I wasn't being vulnerable because I saw that as a weakness. And initially I didn't know how, but it doesn't need to be a big overshare, even just a little bit, so you can form that connection with someone else. Is enough for them to see, oh, she's like me. We have this, although we might be from completely different backgrounds, cultures, all of that, we have a connection through our challenges or our problems, and we're both trying to kind of work through that. So similar to you in terms of the healing space, made me able to kind of assess how I was being and choose to be a different way. And as I said, that shifted my friendships in a really massiff way. Completely understand that perspective. Same kind of birthing into vulnerability. For me, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
so much of what you said resonated and definitely like is mirrored in my experience completely. You articulated it beautifully. And I heard something about modeling there as well. You spoke to permission, like being given permission and then giving yourself permission. But I also feel by like just cracking like little bits open and modeling that with other people that you connect with, actually extend permission to then also do the same. And that's like that's like a beautiful waterfall effect. Can be, and sometimes people don't feel ready for that as well. I want to say sometimes it doesn't feel safe to be there with people. I think it does. There is a discernment, I think, around recognizing. Well, let me take a step back. I think there's an awareness piece about yourself and what you spoke to about recognizing actually the way in which I'm sharing, I'm not actually engaging. I'm already thinking about the answer and really listening and tuning in, being present with what's happening. And then actually what I'm sharing, because I'm not present, isn't coming from a grounded space.
No.
So then that in turn doesn't really land with other people in a meaningful way either. So there is something about like awareness, about building your own awareness of how you are in yourself, in your body, like how you're feeling, noticing the cues. How am I feeling? How am I feeling at this moment? And does it feel safe, appropriate to be open and truthful? I think there's something about vulnerability which is like exposing your truth, you know, being able to open up and kind of expose your truth to someone or in a situation that I think Brene, there was a quote I found by Brene Brown. I'm not going to get it right off the top of my head. But it's like doing the thing and worrying less about the outcome, like regardless of the outcome. I'm going to be here and I'm going to be truthful about who I am and authentic about who I am, regardless of the outcome. And that's quite courageous, I think. I believe that's very courageous, actually.
It's an incredible strength, as you say. I like that. We do have to obviously be aware. You know, I wouldn't expect people just to kind of be vulnerable anywhere and everywhere with anyone unless they felt drawn to. It's their choice, but that's the thing. It's more their choice to do that. And as you said, a lot of it comes through feeling out the conversation and the person, you know, and just kind of deciding what's needed, without sort of kind of leaving yourself completely exposed. So it has to kind of be tempered and felt out, and it's unique to everybody and everybody's experiences. And some people you might feel a bit more vulnerable or want to be a bit more vulnerable, and others you'll clearly not want to, and that we do need to listen to that too. But yeah, I think it's important to understand what's making us behave in a certain way, and is it, as you say, blocking us from deeper connections which aren't serving us? You know, if we want connection, whether it's with friendships or, you know, love relationships or in business, we have to. And I can see it all comes from that trauma and pain, kind of what you were saying in the beginning. You know, the childhood experiences we have made us build up this wall, and so far it's stood us in good stead. It's protected us. But what it's also doing, it can be felt by the other person too, and it also stops them from approaching, stops them from opening up, because they're not feeling that energy from you. They're not feeling there is space for them to do that from you as well. So yeah, it's I like that. It's something we have to kind of navigate and adapt according to the situation, for sure. But it's just understanding whether what do we want out of this connection? What do we want for ourselves, in terms of our own identity, how we want to show up, and what does that mean I have to do in order to make that happen in a safe way. But yeah, completely agree.
I'm hearing something about relational, like we are relational beings. We're not here alone. We didn't arrive here alone, you know, not here alone. And a human desire is connectivity, is relationship with other. We are social, and there are so many non-verbal cues around whether there is a connection, whether there is safety, whether there can be vulnerability that we're often not attuned to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I would say that there's kind of like what's coming up is something about boundaries and understanding your boundaries, understanding people's boundaries, because sometimes there is an oversharing or a dumping on without the the self-awareness or the bigger awareness that actually maybe this is not the right time or space to be sharing in this way. So I think there are attunements. I'm going to say. I was going to say skills. I was going to say skills. Maybe they are. Maybe they. But I think there's awareness, discernment, attunements. Doing that self-inquiry can start to help you find out where vulnerability lives for you, how it can show up for you in a way that you can fully embrace it.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. So what does vulnerability look like in business?
Yeah, I think real transparency and vulnerability, I'm still working that out. I'm still working out what that looks like for me personally. But I do around business, there is a real vulnerability. I think in any time that you're going into, whether you work for someone else, you have a career, or whether you own your own business, entrepreneurial, there's an asking of you, or a requirement of you to show up in a certain way. And sometimes there can be a conflict, as I spoke to before, about how you show up and how that that feels to show up. And sometimes there can be a conflict there that means it can be uncomfortable. And you might there's many ways that we kind of can respond to that, the discomfort of being visible or showing up in a particular way that you believe you're being asked to. Could be to retreat, could be to put lots of pressure on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Could be kind of hide away and not be vulnerable to
Mm-hmm.
that outer shell.
Yeah.
So I think with business, what I know, what I help my clients with actually, and what I, as always, like, can still constantly practicing is authenticity.
Mm.
Is how do I show up? How do I be visible and offer what I have to offer in a way that feels aligned to me and me authentically? And sometimes that can feel quite vulnerable.
Mm.
So there, in business or in career, there's an asking or a willingness, I think, around being open, about opening up yourself to, as I said before, showing up authentically as yourself, regardless of the outcome,
Yeah.
regardless of the response,
Mm-hmm.
not making the response about you, because it's not about
Yeah.
you. The response is always, well, the response is always about us, but that goes, so if it's the other person, the response is always about them or us.
Yes.
We're
Yeah.
holding.
Yeah.
And these are the things that you're not taught, that aren't
No.
discussed,
Mm.
that aren't, shared.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear your perspective and your
Yeah,
experience.
I think it does depend on whether you are working for someone else in corporate, for example, or if you have your own business. But yeah, if you're working in corporate, although we have, as I said, advocates like, you call them thought leaders, like Brene Brown, that hasn't seeped all the way through yet, the corporate world. So I think there's still the view that vulnerability equals weakness. And so to show, I mean, I was working in IT, as I said, 150 people, majority of those were men, like a handful of women there. So it wouldn't have gone down well for me to be vulnerable, or in terms of in a big meeting with my bosses and things like that. With my team, though, I could be a little bit more vulnerable, and it helped me connect more with them and understand them more and them me. But with the senior managers, you had to play a different game, put it that way. I couldn't be the authentic. I had to do something slightly different, which is probably one of the reasons why I moved out and started my own business. I could do things the way I wanted to do it.
Yeah,
But, definitely in business, particularly as a coach, and even when teaching Reiki, I share my own stories. I share my own weaknesses, and I share the things I might be working on, trying to overcome. And it just helps them to understand what's possible. It helps us to connect in terms of my clients or students. So it actually does become a superpower. Whereas if I was in that role being really righteous and I know everything and it becomes like I'm up here, they're down there. It just doesn't work
yeah,
in that world. And so we're co-creating. We very much understand that, don't we, in the spiritual world, the world of coaching and that kind of thing. But in the corporate world, I think there's still a lot of work to do to create an environment, like you said at the beginning, where people feel safe to be vulnerable, first of all, understanding there won't be any repercussions. Because, yeah, you may, depending on how you're doing it, as Brene Brown says, you can go in fearlessly and not care about the repercussions, but then, okay, I might be out of a job, can't feed my family. So the impact is there might be another way to express what you want to express without losing your job, if that makes sense. So I think there's a different need. It's not fully embraced, basically, in the corporate world compared to
yeah.
when you're doing what you want to do for yourself, in terms of vulnerability anyway.
And what you're saying really resonates because, you know, I was in the corporate world as well.
Yeah.
And completely, as you said, I know for a fact that's why I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
Because I did feel that I couldn't fully be myself. And as I said at the beginning, I felt this conflict and this real desire to actually be more authentic. It felt like it was draining my soul, really, not be able to show up in a way that felt more natural to me. Definitely, I mean, it's been a long time since I've been there, and I really don't interact with that world anymore. And I feel a little bit sad that it's like us on a number of different levels. There seems that the organization is not getting the full richness of that person if they can't, you know, show up with some vulnerability and authenticity. You know what else could be happening in a working environment like that actually nurtured and embraced a more vulnerable space or environment. How much more creativity could flow, how much more risk taking, and kind of how many more solutions might arise from that. Yeah, so yeah, I really, as you're speaking, that's what I was kind of hearing from you and reflecting on in my own journey as well. And yeah, as you say, moving into a well-being entrepreneurial space, you do have more room. But I do think there is like there's a transition if you've come from corporate, that there is this transition that or I can say I have made over time, where I've kind of opened up and responded to my own way of being in business, that actually doesn't conform really to the ideas that I thought you know, all these kind of ideas and beliefs that I had around business that don't necessarily need to be true for me in order to be in business or have an entrepreneurial business. And I think with more sharing, we can start to have conversations about the different ways in which we can be in business and be in less conflict with our values and who we are authentically, and bring a little bit more of that vulnerability with the resource, with the awareness, with the discernment and the understanding, bring a little bit more vulnerability into that space. In all areas, not just in the circle, you know, not just in the room itself where we do the work, because that needs to be, you know, that's where it is, but showing up here and on email and, you know, all the other things that are required when you're running a business, essentially. How can we start to be less armored or less superficial, maybe.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, not just in terms of how can we be vulnerable with our clients on a one-to-one, but also in marketing, particularly. I think that's where people put on this space or say the jargon that everyone else is saying. And I've been guilty of that as well. Which presents this picture that everything is fabulous And then, you know, because you just see a 2-3 second reel on Instagram and you think, oh, that person has a great life, and you're, you know, someone is coming to you because of that. They want that life, not really seeing the bigger picture behind it, because we're not portraying the bigger picture. So perhaps there is a need, you know, as I said, including me, to be a bit more vulnerable in terms of what I promote about myself and my marketing, which is, you know, people do connect with that as well. We're always told to start with our story, but then we do fall into this jargon style marketing speak, you know, everything is fabulous, click here and da 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 da, your life is changing type thing. So I think definitely something to reflect on, even for me to reflect on, in terms of how I'm presenting myself, and how I can do that more authentically. So there's, you know, people can still see there's a nice kind of end to it, but they see a bit more of a journey, you know, behind the things that we've achieved in our lives, or the transformations we've achieved, and sharing those things, or things we may be going through now, you know, being a bit more vulnerable around that, which then also builds connection, you know, and which is, as you said, is really important.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it really is all about connection, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would say also there is, you know, again, to just bring back the boundaries as well, that and a discernment about where that feels aligned, where that feels aligned for you, where that you're not, I don't think either of us are saying send out an email and share, everything.
No.
Everything. I mean, I think we share what we feel aligned or comfortable.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I think it's nice to show that journey. I think it's nice to leave people with a kind of happy feeling, happy ending. So you may start with, okay, this happened to me, and this is how I got through it, type thing. But a lot of the time we're missing this happened to me, and we're going straight to this is me now, and we're missing a bit of the journey. So I completely agree. And people don't really want to read someone and be depressed. And they're not then going to want to work with you if you can't help them and you haven't got yourself out of your problem yourself. But at least maybe, I think, just being, as you said, you've got to be discerning about it. You've got to decide what works for you, but actually choosing to share something which maybe you wouldn't share, you're not sharing too much, but you wouldn't share normally, because you want to get straight to the happy ending. But people kind of want to see that journey a little bit, and it gives them hope. So yeah, I think I may come from, in terms of my marketing, I'll come from that perspective. I think I have been, but maybe do that a little bit more.
I think well,
do a little bit more sharing.
I think just truth. It goes back to the exposing truth. And however much or little you share, like sharing your truth is the thing that connects, because often our truth is reflected in others too, and they can recognize themselves in you, and that's the connection, that's the resonance that allows people to just feel more open to exploring with you in business, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. And it is part of your unique story as well, that vulnerability is something that people will connect with. And I avoided that initially in business. And then when I started sharing about my divorce and about, you know, various things, you know, going on, people would literally email me saying, oh, that really resonated with me. Can you help me with XYZ? So they can suddenly see themselves in you because of that vulnerability, and you being willing to be vulnerable in an authentic way, where, you know, it's something that's still not difficult to talk about, but it's still important for you to talk about. It's not just something you're paying lip service to because it's going to get people in. You know, you actually do genuinely still have a connection to that story, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's brilliant. So Jae, should we move on to vulnerability in relationships? I'll start this off. Because just like you had a look at the definition of vulnerability, and you found a quote in Brene. But today there was a YouTube short And it was Trevor Noah. It was really interesting. Trevor Noah talking about the fact that a lot of men are just saying, and not talking about men in general, but a lot of men were having sex, lots of sex and things like that. But what they were actually looking for was intimacy. They were looking for a space to be vulnerable, a space to show their emotions, because obviously in wider society, they're not really allowed to do that. Still not. Some can, but still not.
Yeah.
And it just really hit home. But I also know it applies to women too. A lot of women are also doing the same thing, looking for intimacy, looking for love in all the wrong places, I guess you could say, and looking for that space where they can just be themselves and be vulnerable and be open. But that was really interesting to kind of open that up on YouTube this morning from Trevor Noah and get the male perspective of it too. That really, it's kind of speaking to what you said. We're all looking for connection. We're all looking for that, and we think when we're not, because we're just going from maybe person to person, but we are actually really seeking something, seeking that space where we can be safely vulnerable. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay. Yeah, I think there is a direct line from let's call discerning vulnerability to intimacy. And so being vulnerable, I've been in a relationship with my husband for 18 years now, married for 10 this year. So I've seen, I've experienced what it is to be in relationship with someone at that close, in that way for a long time, day in, day out, year in, year out.
Yeah.
And it requires vulnerability in order to be there. To stay there, to be in communication, which is like just the fundamental part of what I would term it as partnership. It's a partnership. So to stay in communication really requires you to stay open and to stay vulnerable and to be able to receive the other's perspective and stay open and not close. And that doesn't, I'm not saying like we don't live in a magic land, like that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
But it really is a fundamental part of having an intimate relationship with someone is being able to give and receive and hold vulnerability for each other. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering it, but that's like the first thing that came up is like it's not it just doesn't come automatically is what I say. I think there's an idea about, I'll meet someone and I'll fall in love with them and they'll fall in love with me, and that will be it. That will be enough. And we'll work it out, and that's the answer. Well, we'll get married maybe if that's on on the horizon, and then
happily ever after.
Yeah, smooth sailing. Done it. We've made it. The reality is, again, we're relational beings and we have needs and we have our own stuff that we're bringing into that relationship, and that stuff impacts the other person. You have to be vulnerable enough to learn, I would say, not because it doesn't come off the bat, but to learn that about yourself and learn the other person as well. And that does that's how intimacy really is, for me, is kind of
Yeah.
forged between two people. It's this willingness to be in partnership and to be open to communicate in a vulnerable way, regardless of the outcome. Like, I need to make this. It's important that we have this understanding and this connection, even if we can't meet in the middle. I should hear your perspective and hear and receive your perspective, even if I don't agree with it, and vice versa. And then we find some way to meet in the middle. And I remember Ian Van Zandt saying something about often people get caught up on the problem, on the conflict, rather than each other. So then the conflict becomes the thing that they're tied up in, and forget actually, no, there's me and there's you, and actually this is the relationship, not the conflicts. So yeah, I don't know if I've answered. I just spoke.
No, it has, because so vulnerability, it leads to growth, doesn't it? It leads to that emotional connection, that understanding. You create the space for each other. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be this, as you say, perfect relationship where we just sit and we talk to each other. And, it's very difficult being very honest about how you feel when you think it's going to hurt someone else's feelings. You don't know how they're going to take it. Are they going to leave? All these things kind of come up. But there is, when you kind of take that step and are vulnerable, it does, and in my experience as well, past relationships, it does create a deeper connection. Whereas, all the scary thoughts you had in your head before about what could happen if I said this or was honest about this, it just doesn't happen. It actually elevates your connection, elevates your relationship. But it's not an easy thing to do initially. So it is important, as you said, for you both to set space and agree how you're going to do that, and be vulnerable. And what was coming to me as well is, I guess, hopping back to work. I think we mentioned it when we had our chat before we did this call. Yes, particularly speaking to what Trevor Noah was saying, men, they have to not be vulnerable, and be strong, be seen to be strong, not be seen to be weak, and not have that emotional weakness. And then as women going into the world of work, we have been encouraged to adopt that same stance in order to succeed in the world of work, the corporate world, and whatever it might be. And so we're bringing that same role, that same identity, that kind of mixed up role into the relationship. And so we end up with this loggerheads, I'm not going to be weak. I'm going to stand up and, so it does take one person sometimes to initiate that and make it safe for the other person. And then, the other person can go with it. But if it doesn't happen, it can stop that connection deepening. So,
it takes trust. It takes
100%.
Trust time. Trust does take time. And it, in my experience, it can be fractured quite easily. Depending on your own experiences with trust, it can sometimes be fragile. So building trust, delicate thing. These are delicate things, and they do take vulnerability. And as you're saying about like the roles, the kind of gender roles, and and what's being assigned to masculine and feminine, then that can start to limit the way that we can connect. It starts to prohibit like our ability to connect. And there is definitely, I'm going to say the P word, patriarchy. That we do live in a patriarchal society where those traits are valued and are upheld.
Yeah.
And and this idea of productivity and success and everything that our society is kind of built on or moving us towards can distort how we see ourselves or how we feel that we can behave. And I think particularly for men, yeah, it's very interesting, the point about searching for intimacy. I think it's really insightful because I think that's a deeply unconscious behavior,
Yes.
searching for intimacy through sex, which is connection. But actually, if you're having multiple partners, without you're connecting, but there's no meaning, there's no intimacy there. So actually, what you're seeking, you're not finding. So maybe that then fuels this ongoing search for some kind of satisfaction, unfulfilled. So it's fascinating, and how that comes into relationships, in just this willingness to, I suppose, to risk hurt, to risk being hurt, and to hurt someone else. That's a real thing in a relationship. It can be scary. It can be very scary, a very vulnerable place to be. And something that's coming through is, like, we're often not shown by our parents or by the adults around us what that looks like. We're often not given permission or give permission to ourselves to say something like, what you said hurt me. That really hurt me, and I would like to talk about it with you. That is something that is not common. It's not common out there. But in my experience, that truth of that you hurt, or I felt hurt by what you said, opens up just a pathway for more intimate connection, for more vulnerable connection from that.
Yeah, and that's a truly vulnerable sentence, conversation starter, as opposed to the typical, which is, you always do this, you never do that, which is very attacking, accusing, blaming. Whereas it starts with you and how you're feeling. And then usually that softens the whole conversation, doesn't it? The other person is now listening. They're not on the defense because you're attacking them. So you choosing a more vulnerable approach to that conversation, it just puts a completely different stance on it and allows that conversation to evolve, as opposed to turn into a massive argument, storming off style situation. But it is interesting. It's I've always said that the relationships are, a big healing ground for all of us, because we are, as you said at the beginning, bringing in all of our traumas, our past, our everything. But a lot of the time we put that on lockdown, and we're not truly, for fear of being hurt anymore, for example, we're just putting this big blocker on, and therefore we're not going to have the deep connections that we're seeking. There's not going to be that fulfillment there on either side. Sure.
And I'm thinking about conflict, like our ability to be in conflict with the other and it to be held. Often conflict has really negative associations for us. The thing I that conjures up in my mind immediately is like war, war, like. But actually, conflict can be really useful because that's that's some boundary shaping there. That's like an opportunity to communicate. if you can go into conflict with some vulnerability.
Yes, yeah. I think it's important. I think a relationship without any conflict is not really a relationship at all. But that conflict doesn't have to look like war, shouting, swearing, whatever. You can still have conflict in relationship and resolve that in an emotionally intelligent way.
Yeah.
Where you are both being vulnerable, holding space for each other. But
Yeah.
but it started because you've disagreed about something, and that's fine. But I think it's needed for you to understand more about each other, to both grow. But as I said, at the end of that, usually is a closeness that results in that.
Yes.
So yeah, I think not saying conflict is important. You should have an argument every week, but a relationship without any conflict is a little bit suspect. It's very superficial, put it that way.
Part of having a relationship with someone is working out how you can be in conflict.
Yeah.
How you can be in conflict without retreat. Well, maybe sometimes you need to retreat for a moment, but finding your way together of being in that conflict and moving through it and finding resolution to it. I think that's a massive thing about being in partnership with someone.
Yeah, 100%.
And staying in partnership with someone.
Yes. Longevity is the key. That's if you choose to do that. But that's
not always the answer either. So
yeah. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
Jae, thank you so much. Any last words about vulnerability? Or I think we've covered the main areas we wanted to cover, which is fabulous. So we were looking at friendships and how to be vulnerable and what that gets you. We've looked at business, and then we've now just kind of looked at relationships there in terms of love relationships. But I think it's a very important part of our makeup and something we've hidden, moved away from, for various reasons, including society. But it's nice that people are now moving towards that, and it's becoming a safe thing to kind of to look at. But love that conversation. If people want to work with you, Jae, where can they find you?
Okay, so you can find me at The Light Tree Wellness on Instagram, or thelighttree.co.uk, or my website home. That's
lovely. I think I'll put that in the description, so it'll be there. It'll be there already. But I really enjoyed this. We will be working together, Jae and I, so look out for that. There'll be an in-person kind of gathering circle coming soon at the end of October, so do look out for that. It's going to be beautiful. So mixing the Reiki and the sound healing and the spiritual, it's going to be really amazing, but with the focus on vulnerability. So we really want to bring this out, this conversation out into a space where people can come and explore that a bit more, ask questions, and do some healing around that, which would be wonderful, so they can show up the way they want to show up, right, more authentically.
You are invited to come as you are.
Come as you are. I love it. So watch this space. Those of you that follow me, subscribe to my newsletter, then you will get more information on that as well. And if you're following myself or Jae on Instagram, we'll also have information there too. But I love this conversation, Jae. Thank you so much. I think it's going to be the first of many. There's so many topics that I can't wait to talk to you about that, I'm sure will be a benefit to many out there as well. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. Guys, if you want more of this content, please subscribe, hit the bell to be notified of the next video. Please also like and share this video. If you found it useful, please put something in the comments. We know Kaylee's watching. Hi, Kaylee. Say a little hi to Kaylee. But please put something in the comments. We will answer your questions if you have any questions on this as well. Or share your experience of vulnerability in all those spaces, in the workplace, in relationships and business. We'd love to hear from you. But thank you so much, guys. Take care. Jae, thank you. Bye.